Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. Today I'm going to take a look at the 2006 movie Lady in the Water. It's an M. Night Shyamalan disaster, certainly rotten. We have a 25% on the tomato meter and a 49% on the audience score. Frankly, I'm surprised the audience score isn't more like 19%, which is where I would put this. I've never heard anybody argue that this isn't rotten, certainly in more colorful words than that. So let's jump right into the rotten reviews, get some under the belt. We can start with one from 5 days ago. Half a star, absolute nonsense. I don't know what else to say. I would agree with that. In fact, I would give this half a star. I'm not even going to give it 1 star because to be 1 star, I would say if the film had actually had a higher budget, if it had actually made an attempt to take us someplace other than a rundown motel, then I might have given this 1 star, but I'm just going to give it half a star, so I'll agree with the first one. This movie is no doubt an attempt by M. Night Shyamalan or M. Night Shyamalan. My pronunciation may be incorrect. Either way, it is an attempt by him, or was an attempt by him, to give the big middle finger to Hollywood movie studio executives that had pretty much panned his work up until this point. Certainly, they hadn't seen the worst of him yet. The worst was yet to come, and that will be another Rotten Review episode. But for 2006, this was his low point at that time. This was the director telling Hollywood movie executives that not only were they full of shit and he was a genius, but he had writing that was of such caliber, his creativity was of such genius that it could potentially change the world and save all of humanity. This is part wish fulfillment on M. Night Shyamalan's part, and it's mostly also a middle finger to the financial powers that be in the movie business. Little did the public or the movie studio heads realize that this wouldn't be his lowest point. This was just him, hitting one of the rungs on the ladder on his way down. He would soon hit an even lower rung shortly after this film, but let's continue. 1 star. Best movie where three Groots tag team wrestle a grass dog while a giant eagle carries off a water nymph from an apartment complex that I've ever seen. Yeah, this entire film is, I said it was in a run-down motel. It certainly feels like that, but it's actually supposed to be an apartment complex in which the main character, played by Paul Giamatti, is a doctor, no less, who had a crisis of sorts, a midlife crisis involving the deaths of his wife and child, and suddenly decided to become a handyman at an apartment complex. Now, we don't see that part of it. We just see it opening as Paul Giamatti's character is the handyman. He's fixing people's sink clogs and toilet problems, and in the course of doing that, he falls into the community swimming pool late at night somehow, and discovers like a mermaid type of being floating in the pool, who rescues him. And this, she's not actually a mermaid. She's called a narf. These are colorful words that Shyamalan made up for his crazy fairy tale. It's chock full of these crazy made up words. In any case, this magical princess rescues the handyman, takes him back to his apartment, and we discover that she's been sent from an alternate water world type place to convince a writer to save humanity by writing some earth-changing book. And of course, Shyamalan casts himself as this writer. Normally Shyamalan, he's got the opinion, I guess, that he's a Hitchcockian type of film producer, so he always tries to make some kind of cameo in his films. In this case, he actually cast himself as a character that has entirely too much screen time. He's like the pivotal plot point that of the writer who's got a script or a book that he just needs to finish and get out there, and it's going to change the world in the future. And this magical being has come through somehow through the swimming pool to make sure that he does this. The messed up part, of course, is that this lady in the water, this magical princess, she has hardly any speaking. She doesn't do anything except stare into the camera and into space most of the time. And if she is supposed to be convincing this writer character to produce this pivotal book, she does very little to do so. There's another subplot in which the big bad, wolf-like creatures are coming to hunt her. It doesn't have a lot of logic to it. Even children's fairy tales have more logic than this one that Shyamalan made up. Apparently he said in another interview that he made up this fairy tale for his kids. Could be because he's not very good at it. Certainly, even as a fairy tale, this would fail. So this is basically this, if you watch the whole thing, if you can make it through it, it's his attempt to convince the world that he's a genius and everybody else can go screw themselves. Anyway, let's continue. 2 stars. Whether the movie is good or bad, M. Night Shyamalan is no stranger to unique concepts, and that applies to Lady in the Water. For a while, this movie did have my interest, but I quickly grew tired of it. This movie is quite boring, and the points it tries to make end up not really having much of an impact. I feel like Shyamalan is a very hit or miss director, but this is definitely among his weaker efforts. I think the one thing I liked about the movie was Paul Giamatti's performance. Um, yeah, Paul Giamatti's performance. Yeah, he doesn't do a bad job. He's just in a complete crap movie. He does what Shyamalan tells him to do. He stares into the camera a lot, like a lot of characters in this movie do. Not only is there a lot of staring directly into the camera for some kind of weird effect, but there are also characters with fake accents. For example, there is a either Chinese or Vietnamese character, Chinese or Vietnamese American character living in this apartment complex. She doesn't have an accent in real life, so she puts on a fake Chinese accent that sounds fake, and it's really off-putting. There are a lot of weird things in this movie that they give you a weird vibe, and they don't convince you that Shyamalan's a genius. They just convince you that he's a complete narcissist and he's a dumbass, and he's just showing it on film. So let's continue. 2.5 stars. Would have liked to have heard the comments by the Mystery Science Theater peeps while watching. Again, yes, this does come across as a deliberate attempt to get into the Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, to have people just make fun of you, except we know it's not. And the sad thing is the director actually believes that this is a big middle finger to Hollywood executives, but it's just an embarrassment and a middle finger to himself, really. I don't know, as of 2019, if he realizes just how badly this bombed and backfired on his reputation, and how much those studio executives are probably laughing at him. He must have by now, because if he hasn't, then he is delusional. Let's continue. 5 stars. If you haven't seen this film yet, then do. Absolute must from beginning to end. I would disagree. Unless you just want to see, how much of a middle finger he can extend to the Hollywood powers that be. The first time I watched this, I saw it after it had been released on DVD. I hadn't heard much about it, which should have been a warning sign. Initially, I didn't even know that M. Night was the director of this, so I popped it in and I gave it an honest watch. And the only reason I continued to watch the whole thing, I would have shut it off out of boredom, but at the time I didn't have anything else to do, and I just wanted to find out if there was some kind of point to this story. it was just weird enough to keep me wondering, well, is something going to happen at the end of this? Is there something I'm missing? And, you know, when it got to the end, I found out, nope, the only thing I was missing was seeing the credits roll. It's a complete snooze fest. It's weird, but not weird enough for you to laugh out loud at it. Again, Shyamalan will do a movie like that I will review in another episode. This isn't that movie, though. This one cannot be considered so bad that it's good. There isn't anything to laugh about. There's just a lot of weirdness and wasted footage. And you know, it's like a fantasy insert of the director saying that my writing is going to change the world. I don't think that it has. It has certainly shown us, particularly in worse films than this of his, it has shown us just how amazingly somebody can get backing for his films even though they keep screwing up. That's the big mystery to me. 5 stars. I don't know why this has a low percent. It's a really good movie and different. These days, all you get are effing remakes. No, I'd rather see a remake than see this. 5 stars. This movie will be a classic movie once people revisit it. It is too bad the comments here are so off base. Of course, the cardinal rule that M. Night breaks is mocking a movie critic in his movie. Delicious. I laughed quite heartily at that. However, in the end, this movie is what movies of this genre always try to do, mainly make the audience feel, and feel you do. I was brought in almost at once from Paul Giamatti's excellent portrayal of an apartment handyman. This is some of his best work as an actor. Wow, this person is living on the same planet and breathing the same air as M. Night Shyamalan. You know, the scary part is I'm living on that planet too, and I don't get it. But anyway, this reviewer does bring up an interesting point that one of the characters featured in this plot is that of a professional film critic who's portrayed as a snotty jerk by an actor whose name I don't know, but he portrays snotty jerks very well in all of his films. And the actor did a good job. But the point the director was obviously trying to make is that this snotty film critic needs to be dispatched, and so do film critics in general, I suppose, because again, this is wish fulfillment on the part of M. Night Shyamalan, because this film critic is, I think, the only person in the movie that's outright killed by the monsters that are supposedly not allowed to kill humans. So you get the message. Obviously, that's an intended message. 1 star. A very confusing, boring, complete mess of a fairy tale. Paul Giamatti spends the whole movie looking as confused as everyone else watching it. Yeah, pretty much. There's a lot of confused stares into the camera. What's preposterous is, you know, even though that there is a fairy tale like storyboard introduction kind of squiggly cartoon segment at the beginning to give you some backstory on Shyamalan's weird fairy tale setup, so to speak. It doesn't matter. You forget about it by the time you just see the weirdness of what's going on. And, you know, all these characters in the apartment complex, when strange things do happen, they immediately leap to the conclusion that it's supernatural stuff happening, which is, again, very weird, completely unrealistic. It's not like a fantasy movie is supposed to be realistic, but no character in this actually comes across as authentic in their reactions to what is happening. I don't know. It's just a case of you know, a big middle finger and a weird vibe, and I guess it kept people watching. There aren't a lot of comments saying that people fell asleep, so certainly it was weird enough for them to continue watching. Like, that's what I felt. Let's continue. 2.5 stars. Pretentious and bloated and silly fairy tale, but I didn't hate it. Not high stakes to be invested in. The acting was not bad. Normally I like slow, but even this was pushing it for me. Pretty forgettable. Narf. The Narf is, you know, one of the fairy tale creatures that Shyamalan made up They've got very strange names. Half a star. I think this movie very poorly paced. Well, if you're saying it's very slow and boring, then I would agree. 3.5 stars. This is a weird one, but there's a lot going on here. I think it's worth a second view. No, there's not a lot going on here. There's a lot of strangeness. The whole premise that somebody came from the water in the swimming pool from another land or a fairy tale world is reminiscent of a particular classic Twilight Zone episode, which was more intriguing than this, certainly. So, yeah, I see that Shyamalan was ripping that off with, while he was extending his middle finger to Hollywood executives, but he doesn't do a very good job of ripping it off. He just bores the hell out of everybody. 5 stars. Very underestimated and underrated movie, mostly due to bad advertising. This isn't a horror movie. It's a bedtime story turned into a movie. Knowing that would have helped a lot of viewers come to a better understanding of the movie itself. I really loved this movie's storyline. I think the whole movie was an allegory for faith, belief, hope, and love, wonderfully and entertainingly executed. Wrong. Go back to film school. No, this whole thing is just an exercise in extending a middle finger to the powers that be. And in Shyamalan's world, that's the producers that hold the purse strings to fund his movies. Maybe some bankers in there too. 2.5 stars. How far has M. Night's career fallen? This is just a bad film, whichever way you look. It is the biggest misfire of M. Night Shyamalan's career, including his pre-Sixth Sense movies. I disagree with this right off the bat because this reviewer is writing this in 2018, and this is not the bottom. Come on, we know what that is, and I'm getting to that in another review. 2008 would be the big disaster. So let's move on. Shyamalan's career, including his pre-Sixth Sense movies, in addition to being dull and uninvolving, the film fails to draw in the viewer sufficiently to facilitate suspension of disbelief, which allows the plot to resemble a rejected Ed Wood screenplay. There's probably a cult following that's going to love the film and laud its spiritual overtones and none too subtle redemption. That's quite possible. At some point in the future, even further in the future than 2019, maybe this will have a cult following, but it's going to be niche. It's going to be a very small cult following. 2 stars. Lady in the Water starts out like an average mermaid movie, with apartment superintendent Cleveland Heap discovering a female creature splashing around in the complex's swimming pool. I have to stop here and say, well, she doesn't have anything physically about her. She's just a nude woman that looks exactly like an anatomically correct woman. So why does anybody think she's supernatural at all? She doesn't have mermaid parts to her or anything weird alien going on. So again, it's a fail because if she's a fairy tale character, then she does nothing, says nothing, and looks nothing that would tell the audience or any of the characters in the film that she is in some way not just a normal girl that happened to be in the pool. So again, it's pretty ridiculous. I'll continue. Story, which is the woman's name, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, and she's not actually a mermaid, no tail, but a naiad. Warning, silly nomenclature follows. Story is from the Blue World and is a member of a race called Narfs, rhymes with barfs. She has come to human lands to provide enlightenment to one man. Yes, that's a kind of a synopsis. It's completely ridiculous. And again, why does every character in the movie believe that she's some kind of otherworldly being when in fact she's just an anatomically correct woman that doesn't hardly say anything and stares a lot into space? It's completely ridiculous. Half a star. Richard Lester's The Box makes more sense than this. Yes, it does. 100% that does make sense. I wouldn't say it's a good movie, but it makes sense. 5 stars. Great movie. It was actually a bedtime story for kids. Rotten Tomatoes sucks donkey dick. If you showed kids this, they wouldn't know what the hell it was supposed to be, so wrong answer. This was not just a normal fairy tale by any means. 4.5 stars. Absolutely adore this film. It has an emotional energy at its core. That's beautiful. No, it doesn't. I'm not sure you're watching the same film. 2 stars. I mean, it's still bad, but as usual, I sympathize with Shyamalan because this was advertised as a horror movie, but it's actually a modern fantasy and has little to no horror. It's still his worst film and is pretty much carried by Giamatti, predictably killing it, even in the most absurd character role ever, but we all need to stop misrepresenting Shyamalan already. No, you do a disservice in your 2-star review by not properly representing his views here. His views in this movie are well stated for the audience. He is a genius. His writing is going to change the world. So get that through your head. 5 stars. Great movie with a superb cast. Um, there's nothing wrong with the cast. I can't say they were miscast. There's nothing wrong with the actors. There's nothing wrong with the actors, what the actors are doing, except for the fake Asian accent that the one character has. Again, this is all Shyamalan's screw up. 2.5 stars, not bad for a horror movie. Yeah, it's weird because some reviewers say it's not supposed to be a horror movie, it's supposed to be a fairy tale for kids, but yet, no, a large chunk of the movie does give you a horror vibe. The way it's shot, the mood, the lighting, etc. It does give you a horror weird vibe. So that's what was intended. If it was a fairy tale for kids, no, it was one that had a weird horror vibe to it. 1 star. Of all the Shyamalan movies I've seen, Lady in the Water might be the worst script he's ever written. Now, it's not the worst film he's made because at least this movie is not 100% boring. There are a lot of moments that are laughably bad, but at least I was laughing. The biggest struggle with this movie is that it tells instead of shows. A good fairy tale film might have a brief once upon a time narration at the beginning that sets things up, but the rest of the time they establish the world by simply showing. Well, he does have that at the beginning. There is like some setup to the fairy tale. But again, the rest of the movie right after that, preceding that setup, is so weird in its vibe and its setting that you almost forget that that little segment was there. It's kind of it's there, but it doesn't fit with the way the story continues. I don't know how to describe that better. Like 20 minutes into the movie, I forgot that there was a fairy tale setup at the beginning. That's how this was done. 5 stars. Very original, amazing story, screenplay, great performance, music, one of the most underrated movies. I'd say you're definitely high if you think that. 5 stars, very great movie. Have to understand the deeper meaning. There is no deeper meaning. It kind of sets itself up like it's going to give you one by the end, but the only meaning it gives you are credits rolling. You get nothing from this. 5 stars. Despite what you may have heard, this is an amazing film. If you're not secure enough to watch a modern-day fairy tale, then it's not for you. But if you are in touch with your inner child, you will be impressed. After reading a lot about this movie, the 2 biggest complaints I saw were that Shyamalan was too egotistical and that the movie was poorly put together. For the former, Shyamalan isn't the main character, and if you didn't know who he was, you would never guess he was the director. Yeah, you're right. If you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't know. He didn't say, hey, I'm the director. But he's been in enough of his films and made enough cameos that he knows the audience knows him in large part. This was his attempt to say he's a genius, and I guess you just don't get it yet, so we'll continue. 2 stars. I enjoyed the attempt at something original, but this one went a little too far and tried a little too hard. If you consider the whole movie taking place in a apartment complex, a small apartment complex that resembles a motel, then that's not really trying too hard, is it? You would think with a budget in the 7 figures you could do something that didn't just involve shooting in a little apartment complex. So let's move on. 3 stars. We all knew Shyamalan peaked too soon, but his ideas were still relatively good. Lady in the Water is a great idea, but the execution kind of fell apart within. Not really ridiculous, but it's an okay film. A bedtime story coming to life is a genius idea. However, the bedtime story only comes to life in this movie, and not many parents will tell this story to their children anytime soon. If you actually got a coherent bedtime story out of this that a kid would enjoy, congratulations, because you're a better writer than M. Night, because he didn't put enough elements in here for this to be coherent to even the sleepiest of kids. 2 stars. Bryce Dallas Howard does her best, but the script is so flimsy it's meant for a something to watch with a family of younger siblings, yet I hardly recommend it. No, if you have like some young kids and you're sitting there watching with them, they're going to probably check out around the 5 minute mark because it's not tonally anything that's for them. They will probably get the weird vibes from it and want to do something different. They're not going to enjoy it. 1 star, writerly and insufferable. It has all the false sentimentality of the final sequence in Spielberg's AI, stretched out to feature length. It truly angers me that this movie exists. Well, at least you got some emotion out of it. I couldn't get anything out of it. 1 star, an absolute ridiculous, poorly conceived, amateurishly made, boring as hell insult to the art of cinema itself. Yeah, I'll agree. I think it was more meant as an insult to the powers that be in Hollywood. 2.5 stars. Even for Shyamalan, the plot is too weird and ridiculous, resulting in an overall stupid movie. 5 stars. It seems not too many got this film. I did. Most writers would, and I found it a delight. To me, it's an allegory about the writing process. Really? No, I'm not even going to continue on that. The only allegory to a writing process is that the writing of M. Night Shyamalan is genius, and you need to know it. 5 stars, original and cool. I'll say it's original and bad. 3.5 stars. I think this is a really good movie. It's good. I review it. Yeah, and you smoke a lot of bong too at the same time. 3 stars. Better than average modern day fable. Giamatti carries the whole movie, while Bryce Howard's literally drippy performance is like a fish flopping around out of water, and the hubris of Shyamalan's role is unbelievable. Yeah, so why are you giving it 3 stars? That's why I give it half a star. 4 stars. My wife and I both love this movie. Just like most of his movies, people either get it or they don't get it. These movies are simple and engaging storytelling at its best. Not every movie has to be a blockbuster or blatantly obvious to be good. The subtle and sometimes vague content leaves something to the imagination. Unfortunately, people today need to be spoon-fed everything as they're too lazy to think for themselves. Well, I'll agree in one hand. The audience does need something to be force fed to them, and that's actually a coherent script and some tension and some drama. And they have to be fed something to keep them from becoming bored. Don't forget about that. 5 stars. Wow. The movie was corny but highly unpredictable, and it has a lovely scene that made me cry. Really. I would recommend this movie for those who are afraid of horrors and scary movies because the jump scares work, but end up being unrelated to the fear of the moment. What jump scares? If there were, they didn't work. The movie is corny, but actually tells a good story with plenty of other points that would make it a good movie. Okay, yeah, and maybe did M. Night tell you to come on here? Because that's weird. Half a star. A movie that breaks its own rules and offers no clear defining reason as to why anyone should believe in the skunts, narfs, or eatlons that make up this ridiculous story. The fact that Shyamalan cast himself as the role of the visionary martyrdom writer who saves the world through his great words just reveals how egocentric and narcissistic he is about his own work, which made him too blind to see the many plot holes and the absolute absurdity of his film. He wants to do too much. No, I think he just didn't care. He needed to extend his middle finger so powerfully to the powers that be in Hollywood and to the film critics that he just didn't care what happened otherwise. This was just the way to get his middle finger extended. So you got to feel the love there. 3 stars. This movie is subtle and over the top at the same time. It isn't as bad as some make it out to be. It can still choke me up and give me chills. It's stupid and profound. Wow, that's kind of contradictory. I don't believe you. 3.5 stars. If you can buy into the silly premise, the film is engrossing and delivers. It doesn't deliver anything except boredom. Um, yeah, it's just really bizarre. Um, let's continue. 3.5 stars. A fresh perspective and one of Paul Giamatti's best performances. I am sure that the critics tried to punish M. Night because his blatant attack on film critics in this movie. One of my favorite movies to watch many times. Um, Yeah, you really like M. Night. Like, we just have M. Night fanboys. They don't seem to care what kind of work he produces. He could just like sit on the toilet and push out a turd and use the turd to paint something on the bathroom wall, and you would come in and say, "My God, he's a genius." I don't know what it is. People just like gravitate to this guy. Maybe they appreciate the middle finger to the man or whoever, but the rest of us just want to be entertained, and this movie wasn't entertaining. 1/2 star, horrible, just horrible, a very bizarre and boring way to waste your time. I agree. 1/2 star, one day you will lose a bet, and that bet may be you need to watch this overly self-indulgent mess of a fairy tale or bedtime story. There's very little to say about this film in quotes. It's poorly shot, it's very poorly written, and Paul Giamatti gives us the literal definition of trying to shine a piece of crap. I can't believe someone agreed to spend $70 million making this, even if it was Mr. Shyamalan himself. 70 million? I don't know if that's true. If that's true, that this film cost 70 million, even with marketing thrown in, this is a horrible, I mean, I don't know what to say. You know, it disturbs my faith in the whole system and the American way, because this whole thing took place in like the tiniest section of what you would call an American apartment complex. Why did it take 70 million to film this? Did you have to buy the building in the apartment complex and buy the whole complex too? Because you could have with that kind of money before you started filming. So I don't get it. 1/2 star. If I didn't have insomnia, I would have fell out. 1/2 star. One of the 2 or 3 worst movies I've ever seen, at least if you set aside crappy teen comedies and other obviously unambitious fare. 1.5 star. Shyamalan completely buries an interesting idea in an avalanche of pretentious scripting, silly storytelling, and dreadful pacing. Grade D minus. Yeah, I give it 1/2 star, won't even go to 1 star. 4 stars. I liked it. A plus for imagination. It wasn't imagination, it was anger. It doesn't take imagination to extend your middle finger and take a dump on the floor. It just takes anger. 2.5 stars. Cheesy snore fest. Little memorable action or character here. I had an argument with a buddy over this recently. He really liked this one, describing it as one of Shyamalan's best. Wow, that must have been quite a fight. I obviously disagree, but I took that into account before rendering judgment. If this wasn't a Shyamalan film with the hype that brings, would it have been received better? Yes, although I still don't think it was that great. Just look at who is in this. Paul Giamatti, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sarita Choudhury, Jeffrey Wright, Bob Balaban. Okay, who cares who's in it? The script was terrible. If M. Night is trying to say his writing is genius, he's done the opposite and say that he's told us he's a complete retard. We're laughing at him. 3.5 stars. Lady in the Water did have its rough moments, including the cinematography and character choices. But what I liked most about this movie is the big imagination of M. Night Shyamalan. Everyone says this movie was bad. I don't think so. Everyone says it's silly. It's an attempt at making a good film that was kind of weak when it was first released. Again, I don't think this was an attempt at making a good film. I think the primary goal here was just to extend his middle finger to the man. The purse string holders. 1.5 stars. Lady in the Water is so absolutely insane, it's actually hilarious to watch. No, I disagree. He's got another one that's about that. This one's not even funny. It's not even funny to laugh at it. It's just boring. 2 stars. Boring and a bad, deadly combo that this film wears on its sleeve. This movie thinks that using words like narf in a serious situation sounds cool, but in the real world it sounds stupid. The acting is serviceable and all the actors seem like they want to be there considering the dumb script that they read, but everything else in this movie is terrible. The story is stupid and all the Shyamalan tropes are there, like how a fun quirk is the character's personality. In summary, this is a dumb movie. Yeah, you're being too kind. 2 stars. Lady in the Water is the only movie that I remember the least from M. Night Shyamalan, and only remember the trailers from it when you was young. As is, though, Lady in the Water is an alright movie that could have been better with a rewrite. The acting is actually pretty good, especially Paul Giamatti. The first 30 or 40 minutes of the film is pretty decent, which really would have worked as a short movie, but it gets a bit more and more silly after that. The script is alright, but could have been better. Wow, you're still too kind. You're too kind. Let the hate flow through you. That's what we need to do here. 2.5 stars. It's evident that Lady in the Water would become the start of M. Night Shyamalan's downfall of sorts. The film sits as an awkward medium between Shyamalan's more acclaimed works, The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and his more negatively received works, The Happening, The Last Airbender. Shyamalan's idea of a fantastical fairy tale world colliding with reality has promise on paper and occasionally on screen, but with many facets of the story are oftentimes lost in its convoluted storytelling. If there's some fantasy world colliding with the real world here, this is like left up to the audience to imagine that that's what's happening, because there's nothing in this film that paints that picture. This is just a snooze fest. 3 stars. I hear many people say this is one of the worst films of all time, probably top 3, but for some reason I adore it. It's so insane, so ridiculous, so bizarre, it's mad. No, it's so boring. I'll give you that he's got one film that fits that description. This isn't it. 2.5 stars, pretty bad movie. Its story has moments of intrigue. Some of the film's suspense works, and Giamatti delivers a stellar lead performance, but the majority of the film's story, character, and pacing are dull, and most of the cast's performances are lacking, especially Howard, whose only job seemed to be to sit in a shower and act scared. Yeah, exactly. All Bryce Howard's character did here was just sit curled up with her knees, pulled to her chest, and she just like looks all scared and sad into space. That's her whole performance here. She doesn't do anything else. 4 stars. It's a very unique modern fable. It's a very boring nothing. 5 stars. Some people have no imagination. Sad. I thought it was awesome. We're not expecting to have to use our imagination to put things on the screen. The director's supposed to put things on the screen. That's the point. So get with the times. This isn't storytelling around the campfire. This is a piece of film that you watch on a screen. So I disagree and disavow your 5 stars. 1/2 star. And I thought Shyamalan's other movies were bad. They are, but this is just wow. Yeah. We're into 2016 reviews. I'm surprised that people are saying this is the worst. It's not the worst. He's got 2 worse films than this out there by far. This one is just boring, and it's obviously just a middle finger to, the critics and the purse string holders that don't like him. In my opinion, he just made things harder on himself, and he just shows how petty he is. His narcissism's over the top. This guy's not a genius. For the record, I'll state that I think The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis is, it's got an interesting plot twist that most everybody didn't see coming. Again, that's a mistake of editing. That wasn't M. Night's original intention when he filmed it. He got lucky. Somebody told him how to re-edit it so that it will come out that way. He was a one-hit wonder. One-hit wonder, full of himself, and I don't know what else to say about him except that this movie's not his worst. We'll get to that in another episode. And in that vein, I'm going to call it. I don't think that this deserves a 49% audience score. I think it deserves like a 19% audience score. That's my final word on it. And I'm going to see you on another episode of Rotten, Very Rotten Reviews.